we're going to dive into one of the most fascinating and honestly kind of haunting chapters in American architecture. It's called the Kirkbride Plan, and it's the story behind some of the most incredible, imposing buildings you've ever laid eyes on.
Yeah, you've definitely seen them, right? These massive, almost castle-like buildings. They're usually set way back from the road, kind of looming there, surrounded by all these overgrown grounds. For generations, these are the places that fuel ghost stories and local legends. They just feel like these huge monuments to a really dark and maybe misunderstood past. But here's the twist. What if I told you that these buildings, the ones that are so famous for horror stories, were actually born from this incredible dream of hope and healing? That's the paradox we're going to unpack. Before these places were symbols of fear, they were all about a radical, super optimistic idea that the building itself, the architecture, could actually cure the mind. So the big question is, how on earth did that beautiful dream turn into such a nightmare? Well, to really get why these palaces were even built, we have to go back. We have to look at the brutal reality they were designed to replace.
So, picture this. Before the mid-1800s, the whole idea of treating mental illness, it just didn't really exist. If you were suffering, you were pretty much considered incurable. And what happened to you? Well, you were often just locked away, thrown in with criminals in these disgusting, overcrowded jails or poorhouses. We're talking total chaos, no separation, zero care, and absolutely no hope. But then, something started to change. A really revolutionary idea began to catch on. It was part of this bigger movement, the Age of Reform, and the new philosophy was called moral treatment. And it basically said, hey, wait a minute. Mental illness isn't some permanent stain on your soul. It's a condition, and it's a condition that could be treated with kindness, with structure, and with a decent, humane environment. And leading this charge were incredible activists like Dorothea Dix. This woman traveled thousands of miles, going into these jails and poorhouses and just documenting the horrific things she saw. Her reports were so shocking, they actually forced state governments to act. They started demanding a totally new kind of institution, one that wasn't about punishment, but about rehabilitation. Okay, and this is where our main character enters the scene. A doctor from Philadelphia who was absolutely convinced he'd found the key to curing insanity. But get this, it wasn't in a pill or a potion, it was in a blueprint. This was the big idea from Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride. His theory, which we now call the Kirkbride Plan, was that the hospital's design itself, literally every window, every hallway, even where it was built, was a tool for therapy. He believed that the right environment could actually soothe a troubled mind and guide a patient back to health. And you have to understand how optimistic this was. Kirkbride believed that a staggering 80%, 80, of patients could be completely cured as long as they were treated early and in one of his special hospitals. That's a promise of healing on a scale nobody had ever imagined. And this quote just sums it all up perfectly. The idea was that to help a person, you had to fix their environment first. The building wasn't just a box to hold people in. No, it was an active tool for their recovery, a machine for healing, really. So you're probably asking, okay, how did it actually work? Well, the design was all about a few key things. First, seclusion. They built these places way out in the country to get patients away from the stress of the city. Second, sunlight and air. Everything was designed with these long, thin wings so that every single room got tons of natural light and fresh air. Third was order. The layout was super organized, which was meant to create a calm, predictable environment. And finally, comfort. These places were supposed to feel cheerful and comfortable, not like a prison. The whole thing was designed to be a machine for healing. And look at this. This plan shows you the genius of it. You see how the wings are staggered, one behind the other? That creates this classic Batwing shape. And that wasn't just for looks. It meant that every single patient's room had a window with a view. But it was also for organization. It created this tiered system where the calmest patients were up front, near the main building, and the most disturbed patients were in the wards furthest back. It was all about creating peace and quiet for everyone. And you know what? For a while, it seemed like it was actually working. Dozens of these incredible buildings went up all across America. But that utopian dream, well, it was built on a very fragile foundation. And it really wasn't long before it all started to fall apart. So what happened? What went wrong? To put it simply, the whole system got completely overwhelmed.
Kirkbride's plan was designed for maybe 250 patients max. That was the magic number he thought one person could manage. But pretty soon, these places were crammed with over 1,000 people, sometimes more. So that promise of personal, moral treatment, it just vanished. It was replaced by the grim reality of just watching people, custodial care. The hope of a cure was replaced by lifelong institutionalization. And when governments saw this flood of patients that weren't getting better, they did what governments do. They slashed the funding. And just like that, the mission completely flipped. These places stopped being therapeutic retreats. They became dumping grounds for anyone society didn't want to deal with. And with way too many patients, not nearly enough staff, and no money, the conditions just plummeted. Stories of awful neglect and abuse started leaking out. And those beautiful buildings, the ones designed with so much hope, they became symbols of pure human misery. So by the middle of the 20th century, the whole era of the Grand Asylum was basically over. New treatments, new ideas came along. But that leaves a huge question. What happened to the buildings themselves? Well, their legacy is just as complicated as their history. It's a story of both ruin and amazing rebirth. For decades, a lot of these places were just abandoned, literally left to rot. Their spooky, castle-like look and their dark histories, it made them magnets for ghost stories and fear. They became the stereotype, the haunted asylum you see in movies. It's like one writer said, the buildings themselves were left serving a sentence of their own. Kind of poetic, right? But that is not where this story ends, because in the last couple of decades, some really forward-thinking people, developers, community groups, have started to look past that stigma. And they're doing incredible things. Just look at the Traverse City State Hospital in Michigan. On the left, you've got this peeling, derelict hallway. Total ruin. And on the right, that is the exact same space, completely reborn as this bright, busy corridor with shops and galleries. It's amazing. And check this out, another one from the same place. A room that was literally crumbling apart is now this gorgeous restaurant. They kept the original brickwork, all the history. What these projects prove is that the buildings which were once symbols of being locked away can actually be unlocked themselves. They can get a second chance and become these amazing centers for their communities. So all of this leaves us with a really important and kind of tough final question. As we bring these places back to life, what's the right way to handle their history? How do we honor the thousands of people who lived and suffered inside those walls? Do these buildings become memorials to that past, or are they symbols of rebirth and the future? There's no easy answer, but it's a powerful reminder that these magnificent and deeply misunderstood buildings still have so much to teach us.